Good to have your company. I'm David Foster. The young, we are told, are less at risk than most to the effects of COVID-19. But what of those whose plight has largely been forgotten because of the disease? The child refugees and the thousands who've gone missing across Europe. This is Roundtable. "10,000 who have simply vanished" is one number. 10,000. Well, today we bring back three people who argued at this table 2 years ago that more needs to be done, and we ask them, has anything been done?
As nation states and global institutions have been urgently trying to contain COVID-19, the plight of child refugees has been largely pushed aside. Refugee children forced to live in camps with poor conditions face an anxious wait to see if they can avoid the spread of coronavirus. Moria, Europe's largest refugee camp on the Greek island of Lesbos, houses over 20,000 people, including 10,000 children. Coronavirus has left the camp in lockdown since March, and the pandemic has left unaccompanied refugee children more vulnerable. The UN's Refugee Agency says children are still going missing from reception and care facilities in Europe. It's been 4 years since reports of 10,000 migrant children missing in Europe. Now there are reports suggesting the UK and other countries are using COVID-19 as an excuse to prevent even the most vulnerable refugees from crossing their borders. The head of the International Rescue Committee in Greece said in March, "The situation of the unaccompanied minors is extremely worrying. So many of these young people are living in precarious situations, in detention centres, in camps." Despite countries in Europe saying they will house more than 1,000 children in Moria, fewer than 100 have been evacuated so far. With the global pandemic still ravaging nation states, are the world's most vulnerable refugee children being forgotten?
Once again, joining us, I'm pleased to say we have Matt Saltmarsh, Senior Externals Relations Officer at the UN Refugee Agency. We say hello once again to Tess Berry-Hart, Head of Aid and Advocacy at Calais Action, and one more time to Zia Ahmed Eshanzada from TRT World Citizen Project, who helped to run the Am I Not a Child campaign 2 years since the three of you were on Roundtable. And we're bringing you back together because May the 25th was Missing Child Day. And I'm going to go back over some of the points that you made in May 2018, starting with you, Tess. You said then that Brexit and Trump were keeping missing children off the front page. Well, the world has changed since then, and other things are keeping missing children off the front page. Nothing has changed. How hard is it to get people to pay any attention?
It's always hard to get people to pay attention to issues that are not so imminently theirs. And for the vast majority of people in the UK, issues such as Brexit and COVID-19 are ultimately more pressing for them. That being said, however, last week was Refugee Week, and on World Refugee Day, we had 250 faith leaders writing letters to the government, drawing attention to the plight of child refugees and the difficulties they face in accessing safe and legal routes to asylum. So very hopefully we have a small window that, as the immigration bill progresses through the House, we can start raising their rights more forcefully.
Matt, you talked about a 10-point action plan. I'd like you to update us on that and give us some figures for the number of missing children in Europe now.
Well, just putting it in a global context, we, UNHCR, just released our Global Trends Report, which coincides with World Refugee Day. And that report found that there were 153,000 unaccompanied children globally, plus 25,000 asylum-seeking children. And that was a significant increase on the previous year. So globally, the issue is becoming more acute. Although, of course, I think as we stressed in the last program, it's very hard to measure the number of accompanied children globally because certain countries don't report and the data is very patchy. So we think those figures I just gave you are a significant underestimate of the whole problem. Just turning to Europe and your question, The numbers have actually gone up, or were up in 2019. So last year, 32,000 children arrived in Europe by land and by sea, and about 1/3 of those were unaccompanied children.
I want to come to some of the dangers. And Zia, last time you spoke about children selling their organs or being forced to sell their organs or donate their organs, and sex trafficking. Has anything been put in place to prevent these terrible abuses?
Unfortunately, not as much as we hope to. Of course, our campaign was mainly designed to raise awareness about this crisis, whether it's in Europe or elsewhere, but particularly in Europe because, last time we talked about, a lot of children have been missing there. But the ones that we found, there's still a very small number that were found, and they told their stories. And one of them was that selling their organs, or some of them being forced to sex trafficking or others. So unfortunately, there's still a rise, like my colleague said, the rise of children being missed and each year that people coming to Europe. So that hasn't changed, unfortunately, for better. If one of our partners, Missing Children of Europe, reported that only a handful of them were able to reunite with their families, but majority are still out and about, wandering around Europe.
And Matt, are you despairing of the current situation?
Well, I think I don't want to be totally pessimistic. There are a few crumbs of comfort. We just heard about the process in the UK, and we're hopeful that some of the channels and the pathways to which child refugees can come to this country will be debated, and we hope that there'll be progress post-Brexit. But also in terms of Europe, we now have a relocation scheme for children. And there are commitments to relocate 1,600 children from Greece to various countries. Some countries like Germany have already taken some children. Other countries like France, Portugal, and Finland are committing to do that. It's a small number. In total, there is an estimated 5,300, 5,400 unaccompanied children in Greece. But that, I think, is a good start, and it is a signal of solidarity that some governments are coming together and saying, we're going to try and solve this problem, or at least make a bit of a difference if we can.
Tess, on the last programme, it was this figure was put out there that 92% of those arriving in Libya and then trying to get mostly to Italy, 92% were minors. Has that number changed?
There was a UNICEF report last month that estimated that currently children are making up about a quarter of unaccompanied refugees that are arriving. And of course, there is also always a data lag, so we don't always know the precise numbers. I do think that the border closures and the restrictions on travel may have an impact as well. But I don't think that the drop in numbers has got necessarily comes from a opportune place. But that being said, for instance, from the Greek islands, we did see a transfer of a small amount of unaccompanied refugees because of the COVID crisis in March. So, you know, there's always somewhere to start with being able to improve child refugees' access to safe and legal routes of asylum.
Yeah, let's take a look at, there's a website called missingchildreneurope.eu, and I've picked out for this programme a couple of things that are written on there. This is the first one. 250,000 children are reported missing every year in the EU, one child every 2 minutes. Despite this huge number, it's hard to collect comprehensive data about why these children go missing and what happens when they do. Zia, that is a massive concern, that there's no way of, once they arrive in Europe, about making sure that they can be channeled properly.
No, there really isn't. And as you mentioned, the Missing Children organization in Brussels, they try to grapple with this problem, but they haven't really found a solution to it, because children go missing for different reasons sometimes, especially the migrants and refugees. When they arrive to Europe, they're instructed by their families to do certain things, to stay away from the authority or hide from them, or there could be anything. So it's hard for them to, for any authority or government to keep track of them and find the source of the reason they go missing. But that's something that it's case by case. It really it's different. And I know, like in the past, that we've heard refugees going and turning themselves into authorities, say like, okay, we're minors, we need help. And other times the family tells them, no, don't do that. When you arrive to there, you just you disappear, you do your own thing, you change your identifications, could be anything. But yeah, so unfortunately, it's hard to keep track of it, as our colleague said.
Yeah, with the I Am Not a Child or Am I Not a Child campaign, Zia, did you find that authorities were listening properly? Because May 2018, when you were here on the program, it was said that governments were perhaps hoping that this problem would simply go away.
I don't think there's a real appetite of solving this issue, and particularly when it comes to refugees, because there haven't been any kind of a political will, if you will, for this to come, to an end, or find a solution that is, comprehensive enough for this problem to start to take any real effect. As my colleague from UNHCR said earlier, there are over 5,000, for example, 5,000 minors in Lesbos, Greece. Only 70 of them have just arrived in Germany. 70. I know it's a positive step, but it's a very small step. I mean, we know Germany and other countries could take more, and they can do more, but there isn't enough will to do that. They're not willing to do that. I think the government and Europe should feel this responsibility of this, this burden, if you will.
You see, Matt, and also Tess on this one. Zia, jump in anytime you want to.
Sure.
The point was made in 2018 that there was not a proper way, and it's been made on this program, of collecting data about them when they arrive on their first European piece of mainland. Has that improved at all? Because if you could register them, find out where they are, and plan for their future at that point, part of the problem would be solved. Matt, would it not?
Part of the problem would be, I mean, ultimately, prevention is better than cure, and we can talk about root causes, and we should talk about root causes. But in terms of managing the problem as it is here and now, there is more that can be done, quite frankly. The registration process and identification process is quite patchy. The age identification process also has some shortcomings. There's a lot more that can be done in terms of training authorities, training border forces in terms of recognition. And then when you move on from that initial identification and reception, there's a whole lot more that can be done in terms of fostering and guardianship and creating networks, and also creating a Europe-wide structure that can bring together the different players. A lot of that is really missing, and studies show that unaccompanied children have a much better chance of integration if they're in a caring and nurturing environment. And I think most actors in the sector would agree that that can come from a combination of fostering and guardianship, and also working with states, trying to keep these children out of larger institutions if that's possible, because if they're in those places, they're much more susceptible to abuse and to other negative coping mechanisms. So I think there's can be done.
As mentioned at the top of the program, I mean, this is a world where people are scared of other things, COVID-19 being one of them. And this was released by Missing Children Europe.eu on International Missing Children's Day, May the 25th. Social distancing measures further limit migrant children's access to care and support services, and risk separating them from ill parents or caregivers, making them more vulnerable to traffickers. Matt, more vulnerable to everything, including disease, if you happen to be in a refugee camp. What are the concerns about COVID-19 spreading through these mass populations?
Well, of course, the spread of the pandemic has been quite erratic, and it's hard to say exactly where it will go next. The epicenter seems to currently be perhaps in North America and Latin America, but there are still big concerns about its potential to sweep through crowded refugee settlements. So far in Greece, which is the subject of a lot of our conversation, fortunately, the measures taken have held it at bay. The last figures I saw was something like...
We have a little bit of a sound issue there, Matt. back with you in just a moment. So let me throw this one at Tess. In terms of social distancing, in terms of fears about COVID-19, that is going to make individuals and countries perhaps less inclined to offer succor to these children, and these if they don't know very much about them and they have other issues to worry about themselves.
Unfortunately, that is true. We have seen news reports where unofficial boats of people have tried to chase dinghies off the coasts of Italy and Greece. And very often people have reported that when they landed, they were met with abuse, like, stop bringing your virus here. So there's obviously a real lack of understanding about the virus. However, I do think that this is just a convenient excuse to bolster people's pre-existing attitudes for their nationalism and their fear that by offering refugees sanctuary, that they are somehow opening themselves up to danger. So yes, COVID has made everybody in the world frightened. However, I do think that the risk is, by being put on refugees, seen as an external problem. And whereas we were just talking now about the problem in Greece has been very much kept at bay in refugee camps. However, the restrictions on those camps are still in place. Greek citizens can go to the beach, go to shops, can walk around, but people in the camps cannot. So 40 NGOs have had to write to the government to protest what they see as the very, very extreme difference between people who are allowed freedom of movement in the Greek islands and people in camps who are not.
Matt, do finish what you were saying. You were talking about Greece and we had a little bit of a sound issue.
I was just going to add that, I mean, COVID represents an emergency on top of an emergency for refugees. Obviously, they're predating the coronavirus. There were huge concerns about shelter, sanitation, food, livelihoods, and so on. And now we're putting COVID on top of that. It's another emergency. In terms of unaccompanied children, there are also obviously specific concerns. While children may not be the most susceptible to the pandemic, to the disease, they are of course very vulnerable. Levels of support and services for children, outreach, have had to be cut back. Some of them have had to be done remotely. That's of course very confusing to a disorientated child. Provision of information can be a problem as well, disorientation. So there are specific concerns about the unaccompanied children, of course, related to COVID.
Okay, so we're talking about the problems they are facing. As we come towards the end of the program, we will talk about what can and should be done in these difficult times. Zia, I want to come to you because you were a refugee yourself. The picture that's being painted today of young children either lost somewhere in Europe or in refugee camps is a very distressing one. Do you think we have come some way to handling these type of situations, these poor people, in a better way?
I think from humanitarian perspective, from NGOs, they are doing much more than in the past even. So they're quite successful in terms of helping people as much as they can. But I think, and from a state level, governments, they really haven't. They really don't. Like for example, in Greece, they spend a lot of resources on rebuilding walls and fences and roads, blocking people coming to their countries, versus instead of using those resources to help the refugees in the country to move forward or whatever, taking care of their hygiene, whatever. But unfortunately, I'm not too optimistic. I hate to say it like this, but there haven't been any real progress because the root of the problem is a political one. So therefore, we need our politicians and policymakers to come together for a real solution. Though I'm very optimistic what NGOs and nonprofits are doing in terms of helping refugees, teaching them about the hygiene, and particularly in COVID mind, and teaching them about helping them to get out of these situations. But these are just band-aids. I don't think it'll hold for too long, unfortunately.
And since you started or were part of the Am I Not a Child campaign. What has surprised you the most?
Like I said, I'm going to go back to the same point. The unwillingness of some of the European governments to really come to a solution. It's not that difficult, really. Of course, it's going to be costly, but there are other things that they worry about, like their re-elections and their political agenda, more than the human life. But so that is one of the surprising things, because for me, one would think that we talk about these issues more because it is at our doorsteps. And on top of that, the appetite of like really going out of their way to show the care, and also people aren't talking about it, at the media level. So so for example, TRT World, we talk about it. We create a campaign. I think there should be more noise about this. There's something that I find
perhaps more noise, but Zia, one of the problems, let's get a Tess on this one. One of the problems is more money's needed, and that's going to be in very short supply at the moment.
The difficulty is that, as we've seen with many of the bailout schemes with the COVID-19 emergency, that very often there is money, there just isn't the political will to implement it. So, for instance, the Vulnerable Children's Refugee Rights Scheme, which is proposed to bring vulnerable children from areas of conflict to the UK, is always chronically underfunded unless campaigners push for more money. And I think that when we go to negotiating with the EU, we have to put child refugees and their right to safe and legal routes to asylum in the UK.
But be realistic, Tess. I mean, this country has borrowed goodness knows how many hundreds of billion to deal with COVID, to deal with businesses, etc., etc. You're going to be way down that shopping list.
Unfortunately, many times we've been way down that shopping list. And that's why when you go to the public and see the extent of public support for child refugees, you realise that it's really not so far down the list of concerns that people have. The difficulty is keeping it in the public eye and being able to pressure the government, because all the times that we've been to the public with campaigns, there's been an overwhelming response.
Well, that's very good to know. Hopefully, by doing this program, we are helping to keep it in the public eye. Matt, let me ask you, you said in 2018 these children were ripe for exploitation in so many different ways. That hasn't changed.
I don't think that has changed at all. And really, to resolve this problem, we do have to go back to the root causes. The root causes, as everyone knows, are conflict and persecution, poverty and a lack of development, and in some cases, climate-related issues. Those are what's behind displacement and forced displacement. So if we really want to resolve the problem, we have to look into those issues. And I think, as has been mentioned, the international community is doing a very poor job at that at the moment. We've seen very few conflicts being resolved in recent years. And in fact, we've seen a mutation of different conflicts, new actors coming in. One particular concern of ours is the Sahel region, where there's been huge displacement in countries like Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger. And so that instability, if anything, is growing. So we really have to look at this globally. We are trying to do some things. We are trying to bring together some different actors to try to address in a new way refugee issues. And some of that comes down to small-scale projects. For example, in Africa, we've set up a new project with an NGO partner in Ethiopia to try to foster unaccompanied children and to trace their parents and, if possible, to reunite them with their families. But as has been mentioned, these are very small scale projects and the funding is very tight for them. And the funding
they may be small projects, but each case they deal with is a young person, and dealing with them on a one-to-one basis. It's not small for that particular person. And at this point, I want to mention that there is help out there. There's the Missing Children Europe.eu website, plenty of information on that if you're in trouble or you want to get in touch with the right people. And there's also the 116 000 hotline for which I'm told they need more money. But it is there, 116000. If you're in trouble or you know a young person who is in trouble. Listen, thank you very much indeed. Zia in Los Angeles, Tess in Wales, and Matt, there you are in West London. We appreciate the time that you've taken to come on once again, 2 years after we first highlighted the problems of refugee and missing children here on Roundtable. We have to do it again, sadly. It's not making the headlines, but perhaps if 1 or 2 people out there have seen this program and listened to it, it might make some difference. Great to have you on the program once again. Sorry we had to invite you. From me, David Foster, thank you for watching this edition of Roundtable. We hope to have your company next time. Until then, goodbye.